Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of Call It RevOps with Raja and Akande. And today we're going to be talking about, again, another hot take or maybe slightly controversial sounding, which is trending topic, why RevOps might actually die. So Raj, as we dive into this, I don't think we think RevOps is going to die, but why is it a possibility? And what do we mean by trending topic? Is RevOps just a trend?
Yeah, I mean, so RevOps, I think that I mentioned in the last episode. Like the first time I heard RevOps, we talked about very briefly. We touched on it that revenue operations seems like more of a middle manager for the overall business goal. Right, the overall business goal for companies is always is revenue focused, right? And I think the reason now we're calling this role revenue operations or RevOps, and I think that the way that it came to be is that generally executive leadership just weren't doing their jobs properly. Right? We talked about sales and marketing alignment. We talked about it for 15 years. They're still not aligned, right? Like they're still separate sides of the bridge, fighting the same old kind of battle between my KPIs, your KPIs, this KPI, this KPI. This is what we need. This is so and I think eventually it just failed. Like the whole sales, just like sales and marketing alignment used to be such a hot topic. Now they're like, all right, you know what? We're just going to agree that you guys are not going to get along, and we're just going to put a middle manager, whatever and whatever level of that is. Like if your company has just directors, there's a director of RevOps that oversees marketing and sales. You have a VP of marketing and a VP of sales. Boom, introduce the VP of revenue operations. You have a chief of sales or chief marketing officer. Boom, chief revenue officer. And no matter what hierarchy model you look at, there's now always a need for it, right? Like now it's like we need someone to make sure that marketing and sales are aligned with the company's goals. And I think it came to be because executives and companies, when we talk about the macro environment from a business perspective, they just got sick and tired of it. They got sick and tired of talking about alignment to a point and then just said, fuck it. We're just going to put someone here to make sure everyone's doing their job. And I respect that. And I think the reason RevOps, it could be just another trend, is because of the one problem and one overarching problem that it has over everything else that it's stacked against them just in general, right? Like maybe it might not be a priority. It's not a good business fit. Maybe the org is too small. The org is too big. It has to be. You have to find the right organization. But out of all of that, the biggest thing is who are you going to pick? Yeah, right. Like a lot of RevOps leaders are converted sales leaders, right? And as much as I love the sales teams, it's just finding a fit that does what the role is intended to do. And that is the biggest downfall of revenue operations, is because we're putting people in a place that might not see the entire picture. And that's what that role is intended to do. It's across sales, marketing, and customer alignment, right? If you forget sales and marketing alignment, we said we're going to throw that right out the window. Now we're just going to put someone to oversee it. And once again, the biggest problem with that is what type of person is that, right? Think about the qualifications, even from a job ID perspective. Who are you going to pick? Who is that person that you're going to hire to oversee your entire business? And just remember, it's not, we've archetyped this role to be sales, marketing, and customers. Just FYI, without marketing, sales, and customers, there is no company. So we're not putting a person to monitor the life cycle. We're putting a person in place to oversee the entire success of the company. And that is very, very big, deep shoes to fill. And it has to come with technical experience. You just can't be a strategist, right? Like you just don't know how things work and expect people to do it. You have to be able to roll up your sleeves. You have to be able to work in all of those capacities. And if you can't, and that type of person can't, then that role and this whole RevOps movement is just not going to work.
Yeah, and you're kind of pulling back the veil on it a little bit too, because if you don't know how to achieve marketing and sales alignment, creating a new role, putting a person in that role, or creating a new department and putting people in that, it's not going to fix it without the direction of it. If you didn't know how to do it before, plugging someone in. But to your earlier point, you know, RevOps being the thing that it's now, it's trending so much, it's the conversation piece so much, you know.
It's the new ABM, right? Like ABM was
Exactly.
trending, right? And now it's RevOps that's trending. And that's why I say, like, you know, I understand the reason behind the role. The reason behind the role is that sales and marketing are not going to be aligned. And I think that's a fictitious scenario, or that's a scenario that people just need to accept. Marketing is responsible for this stuff, sales is responsible for this stuff. We will work collaboratively as long as our goals are filled. So, and that's why RevOps is needed.
So before RevOps became a thing, or roles that had revenue officer in them became a thing, how were companies that did it well to varying degrees? How did they achieve sort of RevOps before RevOps became RevOps?
Well, I mean, sales and marketing alignment, right? Sales was on board. Marketing, you know, during the early stages of MarTech, when it was very clearly defined what a marketing qualified lead was, right? You had score that determined everything, right? Score, hey, this person done enough activity. Sales is like, I'm perfectly happy with that. I understand that this is a score. I'm going to reach out to this person, and yes, they've done enough activity. Well, now technology is advanced. We have gotten smarter as consumers. Before, we didn't know as a consumer, on the flip side of the coin, we didn't know we were getting scored for opening or clicking links in emails, right? Like, we didn't know that visiting specific web pages 3 times a day, you know, was giving us a score, and that essentially made us part of their funnel. Now, broadly inside the space, we know all of that. It's you know, there's multiple blogs written on it. There's multiple content that's been produced on it. And now the consumer, just like before, has become wiser. And since the consumer has become wiser, the alignment between sales and marketing has disaligned. And since now customers have become more aware, historically, like, the reason RevOps wasn't there is because the entire goal of the company to expand, to grow, was revenue focused. Now, you know, there's various, and that's why it wasn't needed, because everyone's, I think, the intention was, we're going to grow a company. Now I believe the intention is, we have different situations and different scenarios based off on a company. Your responsibilities are different. Your success metrics are different, right? Marketing was never responsible for revenue before, just sales was. Now everyone is responsible for revenue. Why? Because there wasn't enough technology to have budget or resources against it. You know, I remember, like, when I first started into my career, even before consulting, I was a marketing person of one, and all I did was database stuff,
Yeah.
which wasn't really even marketing. Like, Constant Contact at that time, or MailChimp, was maybe, you know, what, like $100 a year or something like that. I don't know. Like, it was like the cost and the overhead of marketing wasn't that high.
Yeah.
Well, now it is. So now marketing has to prove its worth. And in order to prove its worth, it is now responsible for revenue, which reluctantly some orgs and some individuals in marketing don't want to own. We want all of the technology, right? We want this technology that makes our life easier, but we don't want to put revenue against that to say this is why we need it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a great point too, because before it was just, hey, marketing is going to do marketing thing. Marketing is going to run ads.
Yeah.
You know,
We're gonna
maybe
do some marketing shit.
yeah, we'll post on social media. We see a lot of clicks coming through. People are submitting forms, but in the grand scheme of things, you can't really tell, oh, well, how much revenue is marketing responsible for versus sales versus client retention for renewals and upsells. Now we can say, this is how much you've contributed, right?
Yeah. But the thing is, we don't invest in doing those things. We still want to invest in, you know, redesigning a website every year, or changing the length of a button or something like that, or a hover over, right? Which were all cool things that, when I was, you know, during like the whole, I'm going to age myself, but during the whole website boom, when I was first learning how to code like simple website, like, I'm not sure if you remember, like, the 1997 MTV website, which was like in nowadays. Yeah, right. It was like a page, and every time you hovered over, it was like the most, a horrible blue that would come over and all this other stuff. And like those things made such a difference, right? Now, you can spin up a website with, now recently with AI in like 5 seconds, but even before with WordPress. So all of those marketing things that we enticed people by are just so nominal. It's like when we do ads, right? And people talk about ad fatigue, right? Like you see the same image, it's the same thing. We have fatigue on all of these cool little things. Now it's reverting back to plain text messaging. How do we get the point across? Why? Because all of those flashy things don't really get people to engage with you, right? The other big problem with kind of RevOps, and to prevent RevOps going down the wayside, is it's also turning into very strategy driven. Right? And, there's a lot of blogs out there, RevOps is strategy and they shouldn't focus on operational items like data. Well, that is the most absurd thing I've ever heard in my entire life, right? Like how strategy, I'm trying to figure out how to say this without being mean. One of my favorite quotes of all time, and I think kind of you've heard this before, is that vision without execution is a hallucination. But the reason I like that quote so much is because it calls out what strategy shouldn't be. Yeah. It shouldn't be something that you cannot implement. And if you cannot implement it, then that strategy is no good. Yeah. And I think with revenue operations, the second hurdle is we can talk about everything that we want to do, the art of the possible. How do you make it probable? How do you make it plausible? That is something that if, as a RevOps leader, you're not comfortable with taking that vision and moving it down based off on a company's tech stack and say, this is how we're going to take this, and this is how we are going to go to market with it. And this is, I'm not using that word appropriately, but just generally, this is how we're going to take the strategy. This is how we're going to implement it. This is the software and the technology the company currently has, and this is the timeline that it's going to take. If you can't do that, then there's no point for you to be in RevOps, because that is really the entire premise. It's just not one component. It's the entire thing from start to finish.
Yeah. And there's this idea too. It's like, what is RevOps? And I think the premise of even why we had this podcast called RevOps is because RevOps is not this pie in the sky, impossible thing, totally intangible.
And it shouldn't be. It shouldn't absolutely follow the art of the possible.
Yeah. Exactly. It should be now this is very simplistic, right? And I like to keep things really dumbed down. But if I'm out on the street and I'm waving a sign for you to come into my store, you come into the store, you go talk to a salesperson and you buy a piece of furniture. That's RevOps, right? And then you have someone that comes and delivers the furniture, maintains the furniture if there's a warranty. That's RevOps. And then they'll come back and buy another piece of furniture. Now, I'm dumbing this down quite a bit, but it's about that marketing, sales, and client success alignment, which is really the crux of it.
The thing to take account into RevOps is that if you Google, and we did this last episode, right? Like we talked about what is RevOps, we Googled it, we gave everyone the description of it. There's multiple fucking descriptions of RevOps, right? Yeah. And that's when you know that something is more trendish than it is that's something that you know that is more trendish than based off on feasibility, right? Because when something starts to become more trendish, people and us as marketers just generally, we start adapting onto it and just start adding shit to it that's not needed, right? Like if you Google, so I just Googled it today, right? This was last time we did the episode. I don't know what the quote was from last week, but now it says, what is the purpose of RevOps? It's a strategic approach that integrates and aligns sales, marketing, customer success to enhance the user experience and boost revenue growth. Now, if I just scroll up, RevOps is a business strategy that combines sales, marketing, customer success, and finance to increase the company's revenue. Yeah. Now I'm just gonna I'm literally just scrolling. Revenue operations is the end-to-end business process of driving predictable revenue across marketing, sales, renewals, and expansion. Okay. Right. So when we talk about trends, right? Like what is the archetype of a trend? It's something that you cannot make concrete. And the reason this episode is titled the way that it is, in order to prevent it from happening, because everyone loves RevOps. I think ultimately RevOps is a needed role, but it has to be defined and structured. And if it's not, if it's kind of loosey goosey out there, then it's just going to go the way of another trend, and we're going to have to figure out what the hell to call this podcast.
Yeah. Well, and you know, to your point, this kind of brings up an interesting question, right? So you mentioned MTV during the .com bubble. So I think it's a good segue. So during the .com bubble, we saw these overpriced or overvalued websites die away. And then you had the websites that were actually valuable. The internet stayed around, websites stayed around, but there was a consolidation. So do you think RevOps is going to die? Or do you think there's going to be a consolidation on what the definition is, what the purpose is, and there's alignment around the industry on how to use it?
I think both scenarios are possible. Right. And I think it depends on how we're using it. You know, if we use it gimmickly, if we use it something for that purpose, then yes, it's going to, that, you know, point on the cone of plausibility is leading towards RevOps being looked as nothing more than an overfluffed strategy. Right. But if we did define it and we consolidate it into something that is tangible, then yes, then that's another dot on the cone of plausibility, where that's another future state that we could head towards. We don't know, right? Like, and that's kind of the cool part about that whole cone of plausibility, is that it's giving, like, the scenarios are in front of us. Like, we see these scenarios happening. Is it going to get to a point where everyone's going to just gimmick the crap out of it? Because, like I said, the intention behind RevOps was to keep leadership teams responsible for the company, to make sure the company is profitable.
Yeah.
Now there's a slew of ways that people can be RevOps, and you can be a RevOps strategist. Stupidest shit I've ever heard in my entire life. Right? Like,
yeah. It's all you know. You could be a RevOps strategist is almost just a good strategist. You know, like
it's RevOps strategist. I don't even know what it would. I don't even know what it would be. Like, are you theorizing the idea of revenue operations across marketing and sales, right?
Yeah.
and customer alignment? Are you? So that's why I say is, like, there's multiple scenarios, there's multiple ends to this, and you know, the worst case scenario for us, we just change the title of our podcast. You know, call it something, whatever. Like, it doesn't really matter. We'll just, you know, if ABM was around, we started this podcast like 2 years ago, I would say just call it ABM.
Yeah.
And RevOps comes, and I'm like, hey, just call it RevOps, and whatever the next trend is, and we're going to piggyback off of it, because that's what we do as good marketers.
Well, and the great thing is too, even though the term RevOps might change, RevOps in and of itself will always be around. The title of Chief Revenue Officer might go away, but it's not going to negate sales and marketing needing that alignment and clients for success being a part of that conversation.
Yeah, like the other day I saw an entry-level revenue operations specialist. Like, how the fuck are you a revenue operator? How are you an entry-level revenue operations specialist?
Yeah.
You have, you know what I mean? Like, where does that come? Where does that, like, it's senior leadership, right? And that's what I mean when something gets too gimmicky. It's just like, you're just going to come out of college and you're going to be like, I know about the lead lifecycle funnel and all this marketing technology that's out there, and I'm going to align them, right? Like, you know, there's a lack of clear definition and distinction between revenue operations to make it cohesive enough to stick for long-term gain. And, you know, I think it needs to be, right? I think there needs to be something along the lines of a person that is making sure people are doing their jobs, which is like a middle manager in a nutshell, right? But a company's focus is revenue. Absolutely. Unless you're a nonprofit, and even if you're a nonprofit,
there's still revenue
goals. Just zero out your books. There's still revenue goals. You probably just zero out your books at the end of the year. That's it. That's the difference with it. But I think that's where the problem with RevOps is really going to lie into, is the scalability of once it gets to a point where it gets to it's too gimmicky or too trendy for it to actually make a difference, and that's when you're going to see it taper off. Yeah.
Well, and I think too, you know, if someone comes in and they're entry-level revenue operations specialist, really you're an operations specialist, but everyone's role is tied to revenue, right? Like your role, what you do is going to be in some way, shape, or form tied to revenue, unless you're, you know, I was going to say even HR, and it to a degree is tied to revenue. So as we kind of think about why RevOps might die, we listed the scenarios. What can we do to make sure that it survives? If I'm in an organization, I'm in the marketing operations team, I'm on the sales team, I'm in the customer success team. What are some tangible things that I could do to ensure that RevOps as a strategy can stay active and alive? How can I get that alignment?
I don't think you can. I don't think it's up to the team. Uh, no, I'm sure it's not up to the teams. Yeah. Right? That's the thing. It's not up to the teams. It's up to the role of the person that's overseeing the teams to make sure that they're aligned. For sure. It is not a job for marketing and sales or client success or anything like that. The individual, once again, the fundamental problem with revenue operations as a role is that is the person that is in that position that is overseeing all of it. And that's all that, and that's the baseline of it. If you have a person that doesn't fit into that role and cannot see the bigger picture, cannot see all of those scenarios, and has not, kind of walked in the shoes, so to speak, of it, then that role is not needed at your company.
Well, that's maybe a good topic for another podcast too. What makes a great RevOps leader, and really identifying the characteristics that drive home someone who can fill that role that companies can look for that'll make the most sense.
Yep.
So with that, Raja, I mean, we've covered a lot, and I think we've dove into the trending topic component. If there was one key takeaway, we'll probably do this every episode, but if there's one key takeaway on why RevOps might die and why it might be a trending topic, or if the listeners to say, what was my takeaway from this podcast, what would that be?
I think we covered it. Hire the right person. Like, really evaluate the person that's supposed to, like, do they have experience in all of these things? And if they don't, then you probably want to just wait. Don't fill a role just to fill a role. Don't fill a something to put on your website that says, yes, we are also doing revenue operations, because it's not a strategy. It's not account-based marketing, right? It's not dynamic content or segmentation. It is a person that is responsible for making sure your business is successful from start to finish. So just don't have it to have it.
Yeah. And that could even be the role for someone who's already in one of those positions, right? If you could be in sales or marketing and you could help drive that initiative without having a dedicated person. It sounds like.
Yep. Yep.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you everybody so much for tuning in for this episode of Call It RevOps. The idea that RevOps might die, and I mean that would suck if we had to change our name. But thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to stay tuned for next week as we dive into more, and see you later.